30 years by his side, and he traded me for another woman, never imagining I had written the true ending. I revealed a $3 million secret he couldn't believe. The silence that followed those words was crueler than any shout. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would. And if you, for a single second, feel like this sounds familiar, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me to keep unburdening my soul. There I was, Alice Miller, my wrinkled hands holding a fork halfway to my mouth, when Richard pronounced the sentence that would split me in two. It was a Tuesday in October at our house in Oak Park, a suburb of Chicago. The same mahogany table where we'd celebrated so many Christmases, where my children Matt and Emily had done their elementary school homework, where I had served thousands of dinners believing I was building a home for a lifetime. I was wearing my navy blue dress, the one Richard had given me 5 years ago, which I only wore on special occasions. I had done my hair carefully that afternoon, even put a little rouge on my cheeks because he'd said he wanted to talk about something important at dinner. I thought that maybe, after so many years of routine, he wanted to propose a trip, or perhaps renew our vows like the Johnsons next door had done. How naive I was. The light from the dining room chandelier, that crystal fixture we'd bought together at a flea market in Lincoln Park, illuminated his face in a strange way that night. His eyes, which used to look at me with tenderness when I dressed up for him, now observed me as if he were evaluating an old piece of furniture that was no longer useful. "You look tired, Alice. You're not the woman you used to be," he said as he cut his steak with almost surgical precision, without even looking up from his plate. The aroma of the pot roast I'd been cooking since 3 in the afternoon, following the recipe my mother taught me in this very kitchen 30 years ago, suddenly turned nauseating. My hands began to tremble imperceptibly. "Excuse me?" I managed to whisper, though my throat had closed like a fist. Matt, my 32-year-old son, kept chewing, unfazed. Emily, my only daughter at 29, didn't even look up from her phone. It was as if they had rehearsed this scene, as if everyone knew what was coming except for me. "Look, don't take this the wrong way, but I've been seeing someone. Her name is Jessica, and she makes me feel alive again. You just don't inspire anything in me anymore." The words left his mouth with the same ease he used to ask for the salt. The fork slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the plate, the metallic sound echoing in the tense silence of the dining room. 30 years of marriage. 30 years of waking up at 5 in the morning to make his coffee just the way he liked it, with 2 spoonfuls of sugar and a dash of cinnamon. 30 years of washing his shirts with the care of someone caressing something sacred. 30 years raising his children, building his home, being the woman who held his world together while he built his accounting career at the most prestigious firm in downtown Chicago. And now I didn't inspire him? I waited. I waited for my children, the children I had birthed in pain, raised through sleepless nights, and fed with my own hands, to say something. To jump up. To scream. To defend their mother from the man who had just publicly destroyed her at the table where we had said grace for 3 decades. But Matt just lowered his head, as if he saw something fascinating in his plate of mashed potatoes. And then, my daughter, my Emily, my little girl whom I had taught to braid her hair and comforted through every teenage heartbreak, sighed with the weariness of someone explaining the obvious to a slow learner. "Dad has a right to be happy, Mom. You've already lived your life." Her words were like knives wrapped in velvet, soft but deadly. That's when my body reacted before my mind. I shot up from the chair, stumbling over my own feet as I ran to the bathroom, and I threw up. Not from the food, but from the visceral disgust of hearing from my own daughter's mouth that my life, at 70, was already over. It was like being buried alive while I was still breathing, as if they had decided that Alice Miller had fulfilled her function in this world and it was now time to discard her like an old appliance that no longer worked well. I sat on the cold bathroom floor, my back against the tiled wall I had chosen myself when we remodeled the house 15 years ago. I remembered how Richard and I had argued about the color. He wanted sky blue, I preferred white. In the end, as always, I gave in, and we chose blue. Just as I had given in on the choice of furniture, on vacation destinations, on the children's education, on every big and small decision of our life together. From the dining room, I could hear the muffled voices of my family continuing dinner as if nothing had happened. I heard Emily's nervous laugh, the clinking of silverware against plates, the sound of life carrying on as I disintegrated in the bathroom of my own home. My reflection in the mirror showed me a woman I no longer recognized, her gray hair perfectly coiffed but now lifeless, her wrinkled skin telling the story of 7 decades, her moist eyes that had seen her children born and grow, that had cried with joy on her wedding day, now reflecting a deep and painful confusion. When I finally returned to the dining room, they had finished eating. The plates were stacked by the sink, waiting for me, as always, to wash them. Richard was sitting in his leather armchair reading the newspaper, as if the last 30 minutes hadn't happened. My children had disappeared, probably to their rooms. When, was all I could ask him. When what? He replied without looking up from his paper. When did you decide I wasn't worth it anymore? When did you decide that 30 years meant nothing? For the first time all night, he looked me directly in the eyes. Alice, things change. People change. I changed. Jessica sees me as the man I am, not the husband I'm supposed to be. That night I lay awake until dawn, on the side of the bed that had been mine for 3 decades, listening to the peaceful breathing of the man who had just destroyed my world. I clung to the pillow that smelled of the aftershave I bought for him every month from the corner drugstore, wondering when I had started to become invisible to him. And then I remembered the wooden box my father had given me before he died, hidden in the back of my closet. The documents I hadn't read because Dad had told me to save them for when you really need them. Perhaps that time had come. The following days passed like a slow-motion nightmare. Richard started coming home late, sometimes not at all. When I asked where he'd been, he'd answer with the coldness of a stranger, "It's none of your business anymore, Alice. I have my own life now." But I was still there, a shadow in my own house, washing his clothes, preparing his food, maintaining the home he now shared emotionally with another woman. It was like tending to the plants in a garden that no longer belonged to me. One afternoon, while I was ironing his shirts in the living room, the memories began to wash over me like waves I couldn't stop. Each garment in my hands reminded me of a sacrifice, a surrender, a piece of myself I had given away without a second thought. I remembered when Richard wanted to start his accounting firm and didn't have the startup capital. I was working at a downtown boutique back then, earning just enough for my personal expenses. But I sold the gold earrings my grandmother had inherited, the ones with tiny rubies she'd kept hidden during the Great Depression, sewn into the hem of her dress. They were worth more for their story than their price, but I took them to a pawn shop without hesitation. "This is for our family's future," I told him when I handed him the $5,000. He hugged me, promised that when the business was successful, he would buy me even more beautiful earrings. 30 years later, my ears were still bare while Jessica's were probably already adorned with the jewels he could now afford, thanks to my initial sacrifice. I remembered when Matt wanted to study engineering at Northwestern University. The tuition was impossible for our family budget, but I took night classes in baking and started selling cakes and pies at the Saturday farmers market. For 3 years, my days began at 4 in the morning. I'd prepare breakfast for the family, then go to the market with my baskets full of homemade desserts, return midday to make lunch, and in the afternoons, I'd bake for the next day. My hands filled with small scars from oven burns. My feet swelled from standing for so many hours. But when Matt graduated, when I saw him walk across that stage in his cap and gown, I thought it had all been worth it. He hugged me that day and whispered, "Thanks, Mom. None of this would have been possible without you." Where was that gratitude now? Where was the son who had built his future on the blisters on my feet? I remembered when Emily got married. She wanted a wedding like the ones in magazines, an imported dress, a reception hall on the North Shore, a 15-piece orchestra. Richard said we didn't have that kind of money, that we had to be more practical. But I couldn't bear the disappointment in my daughter's eyes. I started teaching quilting classes in our home. Every afternoon, 6 ladies from the neighborhood would sit in my living room while I taught them cross-stitch and ribbon embroidery. $5 an hour, per lady. For a year and a half, my living room became a workshop as I saved up, dollar by dollar, for Emily's wedding dress. On the day of the wedding, when I saw my daughter walk down the aisle in that dream dress that my aching fingers had paid for, I cried with emotion. She looked for me among the guests, winked, and mouthed, "I love you, Mom." Now that same daughter was telling me I had already lived my life. But there were more memories, more wounds that now bled with the salt of betrayal. I remembered when Richard's mother, Carmen, fell ill with diabetes and needed special care. His other siblings, who lived in different states and even one in Europe, sent money now and then, but no one could come to care for her physically. Richard worked all day and came home exhausted. "Alice, you're the only one who can do it," he had said. "You're so good with the sick, so patient." For 5 years, Carmen lived with us. I would get up every 2 hours at night to give her medicine, to change her when she had an accident, to calm her when the confusion of age made her cry out for people long dead. I quit my job at the boutique because I couldn't leave her alone. Richard would come home from work to find dinner ready, the house spotless, and his mother bathed and in clean clothes. He never complained, but he never thanked me either. It was as if my work was invisible, as if his mother's well-being occurred by magic. When Carmen died, Richard's siblings came for the funeral. They thanked me profusely. "Alice, you're an angel. We don't know how we can ever repay you for what you did for Mom." But when they left, when the routine returned, no one ever mentioned those 5 years of my life that I had given unconditionally. And there I was, ironing the shirt Richard would wear to see his lover, remembering every sacrifice I had made for a family that now treated me like an intruder in my own life. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Emily. Mom, I need you to watch the kids this weekend. David and I are going to Miami. Honey, don't you think we should talk about what happened at dinner? About what your father said to me, about what you said. Oh, Mom, don't be so dramatic. Dad's just having a midlife crisis. He'll get over it. In the meantime, you could take the opportunity to reinvent yourself, do something for yourself for once. Do something for myself? Emily, I've done everything for all of you for 30 years. Yes, but that was your choice. No one forced you to be a stay-at-home mom. Women are different now, more independent. Look at Jessica, she has her own advertising agency, she travels, she has her own money. Jessica. Jessica again. As if that woman was the standard by which I should now be measured. So are you going to watch the kids or not? Because if not, I'll have to cancel the trip. The impatience in her voice was palpable. Yes, honey. I'll watch them. Perfect. I'll drop them off Friday night and pick them up Sunday. And Mom, try not to load them up with sugar like last time, okay? She hung up without saying goodbye. I stood there, holding the phone, finally understanding something I had refused to see. To my family, I was not a person with feelings, needs, or rights. I was a service. A free housekeeper with the added obligation to never complain. That night, when Richard arrived at 11 smelling of perfume that wasn't mine, he looked at me from the bedroom doorway where I was pretending to read a magazine. Alice, we need to talk tomorrow. About the arrangements. What arrangements? About how we're going to divide things. About where you're going to live. His words fell on me like cold stones. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a notification. This is my house too, Richard. I raised your children here, I took care of your mother here, I built our life here, the house is in my name, Alice. It's always been in my name. Jessica and I are going to need the space. He turned off the light and lay down with his back to me, as if he had just solved a minor logistical problem. In the darkness, for the first time in 30 years, I allowed myself to hate. To hate this man who snored peacefully while planning my exile. To hate my children who had decided their mother was disposable. To hate that woman who had arrived to reap the harvest of my decades of sowing. But most of all, I hated myself for having been so naive, for believing that unconditional love would one day be returned. It was just a few hours before dawn when I finally remembered my father's box. The documents he had made me promise to keep, for when you really need them. Maybe it was time to find out what secret I had been carrying all these years. The next morning came with the sound of laughter that didn't include me. I woke up on my side of the bed to find the other side already cold and empty. Richard had gotten up early, something he hadn't done since his new life began. When I went downstairs to make coffee, I found him in the kitchen on the phone, a smile on his face that hadn't been directed at me in months. Yes, my love, I already spoke with her. Everything will be ready for the weekend, he whispered with the tenderness he used to reserve for me. When he saw me, he hung up abruptly, his face transforming into a mask of coldness. Alice, I need you to pack your personal things. Jessica is coming to see the house this Saturday. She wants to do some renovations. The coffee mug slipped from my hands and shattered on the tile floor I had religiously scrubbed for 30 years. The ceramic pieces scattered like fragments of my broken life. Renovations? Richard, this house. I chose every detail, every color, every piece of furniture. Well, Jessica has better taste for these things. She says everything looks very dated. Dated. Like me. I bent down to pick up the pieces of the mug, feeling tears fall silently onto the porcelain fragments. It was the mug Matt had given me for Mother's Day when he was 8. He had drawn a happy family on it with crayon, a dad, a mom, and 2 smiling children under a yellow sun. Be careful, don't cut yourself, Richard said with an indifference that pierced me more than any shout. We can't afford any unnecessary medical expenses right now. He left without breakfast, without a goodbye, leaving me alone with the pieces of my life scattered on the floor. That afternoon, while I was obsessively cleaning every corner of the house as if my worth depended on it, Matt arrived unannounced. My heart leaped with hope. Maybe he was coming to apologize, to tell me they had made a mistake, that I was still important to them. Hey, Mom, he said without looking me in the eye, raiding the refrigerator as if it were his house and I was the help. Son, I'm so glad you came. We need to talk about, yeah, that's what I came to talk about. Look, Mom, Dad asked me to talk to you. About the house. He sat at the kitchen table where he had done his homework throughout his childhood, but now he looked at me as if I were a problematic tenant. Matt, you grew up here. This is the house where I taught you to walk, where we bandaged your scraped knees. Mom, don't be sentimental. Things change. Dad has a right to start over, and frankly, so should you. You can't just stay here crying over a marriage that obviously wasn't working anymore. Wasn't working? Matt, I did everything for this family, yeah, but maybe that was the problem. You became, I don't know how to say this without sounding cruel, a person with no life of your own. Jessica is successful, independent, interesting. You're just Mom. Just Mom. The words drove into my chest like sharpened daggers. My own son, the boy I had held in my arms for entire nights when he had colic, whom I had fed with my own milk, had just reduced 30 years of my existence to just Mom, as if being a mother was something insignificant, something anyone could do without effort or sacrifice. We found an apartment for you, he continued, pulling some papers from his briefcase. On the south side. It's small, but big enough for one person. The security deposit is already paid. I looked at the papers. A 300-square-foot apartment in one of the most rundown parts of the city. The kind of place you send people who no longer matter. Matt, have you been to this neighborhood? Do you know what it's like? Mom, you can't be so picky. You're 70 years old, you don't need much space. Besides, it's near the train, you can get around easily. Get around to where? To do what? I don't know, Mom. To do your things. The things ladies your age do. I had no idea what the things ladies my age do were, because for 30 years, my things had been their things. Their needs had been my absolute priority. And what if I don't want to go? Matt sighed with the condescending patience one uses with a stubborn child. Mom, the house is in Dad's name. Technically, he can ask you to leave whenever he wants. We're being considerate by giving you time and paying the deposit. Considerate. They were kicking me out of my home of 30 years and felt considerate for paying a deposit. You have until Friday to pack. Emily and I will come help you move. He stood up, gave me a mechanical kiss on the forehead, and left, whistling as if he had just solved a minor logistical problem. I was left alone in the kitchen where I had prepared thousands of meals, where I had comforted my children after nightmares, where I had planned birthday parties and magical Christmases. Now it was just a space that another woman would soon occupy, erasing every trace of my existence as if I had never been there. That night, when Richard returned, accompanied by Jessica for the first time, I didn't hide. I stayed in the living room, in my armchair, reading a magazine I couldn't process because tears blurred my vision. Jessica was everything I no longer was. 35, a perfectly styled haircut from an expensive salon, designer clothes, and a confidence that only women who have never had to ask permission to exist possess. She looked at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, how sweet. You must be Alice, she said with a venomous sweetness. Richard has told me so much about you. Oh, really? What has he told you? That you're a very maternal woman. Very dedicated to the family. The way she said maternal made it sound like a disease. Richard put his arm around her waist with a possessiveness he had never shown with me, not even in our early years of marriage. Jessica wants to see the rooms, Alice. To get some ideas for the decor. The decor? Yes, we're going to redo everything. This house needs a more modern feel, Jessica replied, examining my living room as if it were a depressing antique museum. They went upstairs hand in hand, whispering and laughing at jokes that didn't include me. I heard Jessica criticize every detail of my home. This wallpaper has to go, these pieces of furniture are hideous, we could put an office here. My bedroom, where I had given birth to Emily during a blizzard when we couldn't get to the hospital, would become an office. The living room where my children had first crawled would be redesigned to suit a stranger's tastes. When they came down, Jessica approached me with that calculated smile. Alice, I hope there are no hard feelings. These things happen. Men need new stimulation, and well, you've already given all you had to give. You've already given all you had to give. As if I were a dairy cow that had been milked dry and was now being led to the slaughterhouse. Richard told me you have a lovely little apartment waiting for you. How exciting to start a new chapter, right? I didn't answer. I couldn't, because if I opened my mouth, the scream I'd been holding in since Tuesday's dinner would erupt with such force it could shatter the windows. After they left, I went up to the attic where I kept old things. I searched until I found the wooden box my father had given me before he died. I had hidden it behind the Christmas decorations I would never use again. The box was heavy, heavier than I remembered. It was engraved with my father's initials, E.M., Eugene Miller. With trembling hands, I opened the small lock with the key I had worn around my neck for 5 years without ever using. Inside, I found documents I didn't fully understand, deeds, certificates, maps of land in the Texas Hill Country. But there was a letter, written in my father's shaky, ailing hand. Alice, my dear girl. If you are reading this, it means you finally need what was always yours. I bought this land with the money I saved working as a young man. It is worth much more now than it was then. It is yours. It has always been yours. But keep it until you really need it, until you find out who truly loves you and who only loves what you can give them. Trust my words. Gold is tested in fire, and people are tested in misfortune. I love you, daughter. Dad. At the bottom of the letter was a phone number and a name, Mr. Hernandez, trusted attorney. My hands shook as I held other documents. Recent appraisals that someone had updated without my knowledge. The land my father had left me was worth $3 million. $3 million. I sat on the dusty attic floor, surrounded by boxes of memories I would soon have to abandon, holding the proof that I was not the poor, dependent woman everyone thought I was. For the first time in days, I smiled. My family had decided that Alice Miller had nothing of value left to offer. They had no idea how wrong they were. Friday arrived like a punctual executioner. At 8 in the morning, Matt and Emily appeared at my door with cardboard boxes and the efficient attitude of people clearing out an abandoned office. They brought no hugs, no words of comfort. They brought packing tape and markers to label my decades of life into categories: keep, toss, trash. "Good morning, Mom," Emily said with the forced cheerfulness she used when she wanted to get something unpleasant over with quickly. "I hope you have everything ready. The moving truck gets here at 10. I had nothing ready. I had spent the last 3 days sitting in different corners of the house, paralyzed between rage and disbelief. How do you pack up a life? How do you decide what's worth saving and what should be discarded from 30 years of existence? "Mom, why haven't you packed anything?" Matt asked with the impatience he had inherited from his father. "We told you it would be today." "I'm packing," I lied, because the truth was I didn't know where to begin dismantling my existence. Emily sighed dramatically and began emptying my dresser drawers without ceremony. My dresses, my blouses, my sweaters, each garment with a story, a special occasion, a memory, were tossed into boxes like worthless rags. "Mom, this dress is so worn out," she said, holding up the green dress I had worn to my first grandson's baptism. "What do you want this for? Nobody wears these colors anymore. Emily, please, and these shoes are completely out of style. Look, the heels are way too high for a woman your age." Every comment was a small stab. To them, I was not only old and useless, but I also had bad taste, dressed inappropriately, and kept worthless things. It was as if they were erasing not just my physical presence, but also my right to have judgment, tastes, or feelings. Matt went up to the master bedroom and began going through my things like an appraiser evaluating foreclosed property. "What do you need all these photos for, Mom?" he shouted from upstairs. "They're just old pictures of people you don't even remember. They're pictures of the family." I shouted back, feeling my patience finally begin to wear thin. "Mom, don't yell. The neighbors will think we're being cruel to you," Emily scolded, as if my pain were a social inconvenience. When he came down with 3 photo albums, he put them directly into the box marked, trash. "Emily, no. Those photos, Mom, who's going to want to look at pictures from 30 years ago? Besides, everything's saved on your phone now. This just takes up space." In those photos was everything: their first steps, their birthdays, Christmases, graduations. It was the story of how we had been a happy family before they decided I was no longer useful. I rescued them from the trash box when they weren't looking and hid them under my clothes in one of the boxes that would go with me. At 10:30, when the moving truck arrived, my new reality materialized before my eyes. My belongings, everything I was allowed to take, fit into 6 small boxes. 30 years of life reduced to 6 boxes that a single man could carry without help. "Is that everything?" the mover asked. "Yes, that's everything," Matt answered for me, as if I had lost the ability to speak for myself. The apartment on the south side was worse than I had imagined. It was a 3rd-floor walk-up, the walls had water stains, and the only window looked out onto a vacant lot full of trash. The smell of fried food from the taco stand below seeped through every crack, mixing with the scent of dampness and neglect. "Well, Mom, it's not so bad," Emily said, looking around with the fake enthusiasm of someone trying to convince herself she isn't committing an act of cruelty. "It's cozy. Intimate." Intimate was the word you used when something was depressingly small. "The bathroom works fine," Matt added after checking the plumbing like an inspector. "And there's a kitchenette. Perfect for one person." For one person. As if that's all I was, a single unit with no history, no connections, no importance to anyone. "Mom, here's the money for the first 3 months' rent," Emily said, handing me an envelope. "After that, you'll be responsible for managing your finances." Managing with what? I had no income. No job. No savings because everything I had ever earned in my life had been invested in my family's happiness. And after 3 months? "Well, Mom, you'll have to find something. A part-time job, maybe. Or apply for government assistance. There are programs for people in your situation. People in my situation. Old, poor women abandoned by their families. We can't support you forever," Matt added with the brutality of someone explaining an uncomfortable economic fact. "We have our own families to support." After helping me carry the boxes up, they left. Emily gave me a quick peck on the cheek and Matt patted my shoulder like you pat a well-behaved dog. "We'll call you next week to see how you're doing," Emily said as she walked down the stairs without looking back. They didn't call the next week. Or the week after. The first few days in the apartment were a hell of loneliness and humiliation. I didn't know anyone in the neighborhood. I had no television. No internet. I only had my thoughts and the constant noise of the city filtering through the thin walls. I tried calling my children several times, but their phones were always busy or they just didn't answer. When I finally managed to speak with Emily, she told me she was very busy with work and the kids. "Mom, you have to understand that we have our own lives. We can't be calling you every day." "Honey, I'm not asking you to call every day. I just wanted to know how you are, how my grandchildren are. The kids are fine. Busy with school. David thinks it would be better not to confuse them with visits right now. They need stability." Stability? I had been the source of stability in their lives for years. I was the one who watched them when Emily worked late, who made their favorite meals, who read them stories and comforted them when they had nightmares. "Emily, are you saying I can't see my grandchildren?" "I'm not saying that, Mom. Just that, maybe for now it's better to give them space to adjust to the changes." The changes. As if I were the problem, the disruption in their perfect lives. One afternoon, while walking through the nearby market buying what little I could afford with the money they had given me, I saw my youngest grandson, 8-year-old Santiago, with Jessica. They were buying ice cream at a fancy shop in the Woodfield Mall. Santiago looked different. He was wearing new clothes, expensive shoes, and a smile I hadn't seen on his face when he was with me. Jessica was treating him with the exaggerated attention of someone playing the role of the perfect step-grandmother. I hid behind a fruit stand and watched them. When Santiago asked for a second ice cream, Jessica bought it for him immediately. When he asked me for an extra treat, I always had to tell him to wait until after his meal because I didn't want him to get a stomachache. Now I understood why the children preferred to be with her. Jessica could give them everything I couldn't: luxuries, instant gratification, the sense of abundance that comes with new money. "Grandma Alice." Santiago had seen me. He ran towards me with that spontaneous joy only children have, but Jessica quickly followed and took his hand firmly. "Santiago, honey, you shouldn't run off like that," she said with a sweetness that didn't convince me. "It's my grandma," Santiago said, confused by the sudden tension. "Yes, I know who it is," Jessica replied, looking me up and down, assessing my cheap clothes and worn-out shoes. "Alice, what a surprise to see you here." It wasn't a pleasant surprise, that much was clear. "Santiago, my love, how are you? How's your sister?" "We're good, Grandma. Dad, I mean Richard, took us to Disneyland last week. Want to see the pictures?" Richard. My grandson was already calling the man who had destroyed his real grandmother by his first name, as if they were peers. "Santiago, we have to go," Jessica interrupted. "Your mom is waiting for us. But I want to talk to my grandma another time, sweetie. We're in a hurry now." She led him away without giving me a chance to say a proper goodbye. As they walked away, I heard Santiago ask her why he couldn't talk to me longer. "Sometimes adults have complicated situations, my love. You'll understand when you're older." That night, alone in my tiny apartment, with the noise of the taco stand below and the smell of dampness filling my lungs, I made a decision. I took out my father's wooden box and read his letter again. "People are tested in misfortune," he had written. My children and my husband had failed that test spectacularly. The next day, I called Mr. Hernandez. Mr. Hernandez had a small but elegant office in Lincoln Park, with shelves full of law books and a mahogany desk that reminded me of the furniture I'd had to leave behind. He was an older man, about 60, with perfectly combed gray hair and a calm way of speaking that inspired confidence. "Mrs. Miller, your father was a very forward-thinking man," he said after reviewing the documents I had brought him. "This land in the Texas Hill Country has increased significantly in value due to the development boom in the area. According to the most recent appraisals, we're talking about $3.2 million. $3.2 million. The figure echoed in my head, unreal. I, who had spent the last few weeks counting pennies to buy bread, was the owner of a fortune my family couldn't even imagine. What do I need to do to access that money? Well, you can sell the land, you can develop it, or you can simply hold it as an investment. But allow me to ask you something, Mrs. Miller. Your father left very specific instructions about this property. He said you would know when the right time was to use it. Do you believe that time has come?" I thought of my damp apartment, of my children who didn't answer my calls, of Jessica buying my grandson ice cream while I hid behind a fruit stand like a beggar. "Yes, Mr. Hernandez. I believe that time has come." "Perfect. I will begin the paperwork to give you immediate access to these resources. In the meantime, is there anything specific you'd like to do?" For the first time in weeks, I smiled a genuine, heartfelt smile. "Yes. I want to buy a house." That same afternoon, I left the lawyer's office with a feeling I had forgotten existed: power. The power of decision, economic power, power over my own destiny. For the first time in 30 years, I didn't have to ask anyone for permission for anything. I walked through the streets of Lincoln Park without rushing, looking at the elegant brownstones, the boutiques, the cafes where people sat and talked quietly without worrying about money. For decades, I had passed by these places feeling like I belonged to a different, inferior world. Now I knew I had more money than many of the people I had envied from a distance. I went into a cafe I had always wanted to try but considered too expensive. I ordered a cappuccino and a slice of chocolate cake and sat by the window, watching the world with new eyes. The waiter, a kind young man, asked if everything was all right. "It's perfect," I replied. "Everything is perfect." It was the first time I had said those words and truly felt them. When I returned to my apartment that night, the dampness and the smell of fried food no longer depressed me. It was temporary. All of it was temporary. In a few weeks, I would be living wherever I wanted, eating whatever I craved, making my own decisions without having to justify them to anyone. But before I moved, I had something to do. The next day, I called Matt. "Hello, son. Do you have time to talk?" "Mom, I'm in a meeting. Can it be later?" "It's important." "Okay, but make it quick. I want to invite you to lunch tomorrow. You and Emily. There's something I need to tell you." "Are you okay? You're not sick, are you?" "Because we can't handle any medical bills right now, medical bills." His first concern when his mother wanted to see him was not my well-being, but the cost he might incur. "I'm not sick, Matt. I just want to talk to you." "All right. Where? But make it somewhere cheap, okay?" "Alinea." "Alinea? Mom, that restaurant is ridiculously expensive. We can't, my treat." "Your treat?" "Mom, where are you going to get the money for Alinea?" "I'll see you tomorrow at 2. I've already made the reservation." I hung up before he could protest further. Alinea was one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, the kind of place Richard had always wanted to take important clients but considered too expensive even for special occasions. I had never been. For 30 years, I had cooked at home because, why waste money at restaurants when Alice cooks so well? I arrived before my children, wearing the only decent dress I had but feeling like I had every right to be there. The hostess greeted me professionally and led me to a table with a view of the garden. Matt and Emily arrived together, clearly nervous and confused. I saw them searching for me among the tables as if they couldn't believe their mother was in such an elegant place. "Mom, what is all this?" Emily asked, sitting down carefully as if she were afraid of breaking something expensive. "Are you really going to pay for this?" "Yes, honey. I'm paying the bill." "But how? Where did you get the money?" "That's precisely what I wanted to talk to you about." Matt looked at the menu and nearly choked on his water. "Mom, these tasting menus cost hundreds of dollars per person. This is insane. Order whatever you like. Order wine if you want." "Wine? Mom, what's gotten into you? Are you feeling okay?" I told them about my father's inheritance. About the land in Texas. About the $3.2 million I had been secretly holding for 5 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily was the first to react. $3.2 million? And you never told us? My father asked me to keep it a secret until I really needed it. But why? Why would you hide something like that from us? Matt's voice had become sharp, almost hysterical. Because he told me something very wise, that people are tested in misfortune. And you both failed that test completely. Mom, I don't understand. If you have all this money, why did you let us believe you were poor? Why didn't you say anything when Dad kicked you out of the house? Because I wanted to see what you would do. I wanted to see if you would defend me, if you would support me, if you would show even a fraction of the love I gave you for 30 years. Emily started to cry, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration. "This isn't fair. You made us look like the villains when you had money the whole time." "Villains? Emily, you threw me out of my home. You told me I had already lived my life. You put me in a miserable apartment and abandoned me. How did that make you look like villains? You became villains all on your own." Matt tried a different approach. "Mom, I understand you're upset, but we didn't know. If we had known you had money, what? You would have treated me differently? You only respect me if I have money? It's not that, it's just, the circumstances would have been different." "The circumstances, Matt, were that I was your mother. That I had raised you, loved you, sacrificed my life for you. That shouldn't change because of money." The server arrived to take our order. My children ordered the most expensive items on the menu and a $400 bottle of wine. Now that they knew I could pay, their appetites had grown considerably. "Mom, obviously this changes everything," Emily said after the wine arrived. "You can move back into the house. I can talk to Dad, I'm sure we can work things out with Jessica. I don't want to go back to that house." "But why? It's your home." "My home is where I am respected. And clearly, that house is not that place." "Mom, don't be stubborn. We can start over, do things right this time." Do things right? Matt, you treated me like garbage. You threw me out of my house, abandoned me in a horrible apartment, and told me I was useless. And now that you know I have money, you want to do things right? Mom, people make mistakes, these weren't mistakes. They were choices. Cruel, calculated choices. We finished the meal in a tense silence. When the bill came, over $1,000, I paid it without blinking. My children watched me as if they were seeing a stranger. As we left the restaurant, Emily grabbed my arm. Mom, I know you're hurt, but we're family. Families forgive each other. You're right, Emily. Families do forgive each other. But they also respect each other. And you haven't respected me for a single day since your father decided to trade me for another woman. So what are you going to do? Are you going to punish us forever? I'm not going to punish you. I'm simply going to live my life. For the first time in 30 years, I'm going to live for myself. That night, in my temporary apartment, I started making plans. I looked at listings for houses in the best neighborhoods in the city. I researched trips I had always wanted to take. I looked up university programs for senior citizens. For the first time in decades, my future was entirely my own. And it felt wonderful. The call came 3 days after the lunch at Alinea. It was Richard, and his voice had a tone I hadn't heard in years, respect mixed with nervousness. Alice, we need to talk. The kids told me about your financial situation. My financial situation. As if it were a contagious disease. What do you want, Richard? I think we made some mistakes. Maybe I was hasty in my decisions. Jessica and I have been talking, and we think it would be good for all of us to meet, as a family. Jessica wants to meet with me? How interesting. Alice, don't be sarcastic. This is serious. We have to fix things between us. Fix what things, exactly? Well, everything. The divorce, the house, the grandchildren, everything can be reconsidered now that we know you have resources. There it was. The naked, raw truth. Now that they knew I had money, everything could be reconsidered. All right, Richard. Let's meet. But it will be on my terms, at a place I choose, and at a time I decide. Of course, Alice. Whatever you say. Whatever I said. How things had changed in a week. Tomorrow at 6 in the evening at the St. Regis Hotel. The presidential suite. And I want everyone there, you, Jessica, Matt, Emily, and the grandchildren. The St. Regis? Alice, that must cost a fortune, I'll cover the expenses. Just make sure you're all there. That night, I slept better than I had in months. For the first time, I was in complete control of the situation, and I knew exactly what I was going to do. The presidential suite at the St. Regis was stunning, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city, designer furniture, and an air of elegance that screamed money in every detail. I had a round table set in the center, with chairs for 8 and a full tea service. I arrived an hour early to prepare myself mentally. I had bought a new dress from a boutique on Michigan Avenue that I had always admired from the outside. It was navy blue, elegant but not ostentatious, and it made me feel powerful. I had also had my hair done at a salon, and for the first time in years, I recognized myself in the mirror as the woman I had been before becoming just the wife of and the mother of. Richard arrived first, with Jessica. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than 3 months' rent at my old apartment, but she looked nervous. Richard, meanwhile, wore the fake smile he used when trying to sell insurance to potential clients. Alice, you look very good, Richard said, clearly surprised by my transformation. Thank you, I replied without getting up from my chair. I was no longer the one who had to stand to receive them. Jessica approached with that perfected plastic smile, but now there was something different in her eyes. She no longer looked at me like a nuisance, but like a threat. Alice, so good to see you. I hope we can clear up all the misunderstandings. There were no misunderstandings, Jessica. Everything was very clear. My children arrived with their families. The grandchildren ran to me as they always had, and for a moment, my heart softened. Santiago hugged me with that pure strength only children possess. Grandma, why haven't we ever been to a place this nice before? Because before, Grandma didn't know she could come to places like this, my love. Matt and Emily sat down cautiously, as if they were in enemy territory. Which, in a way, they were. Well, I began once everyone was seated. I suppose you're wondering why I've called you all here. Mom, we're hoping it's to fix things, Emily said with the little girl voice she used when she wanted something. Indeed, Emily. I'm here to fix things. But not in the way you expect. I pulled a folder from my handbag with documents Mr. Hernandez had prepared. Over the last few weeks, I've had time to reflect on our family, on what love really means, and on the difference between loving someone and depending on someone. Richard leaned forward, clearly anxious. Alice, I know I made mistakes. I was confused, going through a crisis. No, Richard. You weren't confused. You knew exactly what you were doing. You assessed me as if I were a financial asset that was no longer providing returns, and you decided to trade me in for a newer model. Jessica shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Alice, I never wanted things to be like this, really, Jessica? Because I distinctly remember you telling me that I had already given all I had to give, that Richard needed new stimulation. I was trying to be honest, honest. How noble of you. I opened the folder and took out the first document. This is the appraisal for the house I lived in for 30 years. According to public property records, I contributed 40% of the initial down payment. However, Richard made sure everything was exclusively in his name. Richard turned pale. Alice, that was for tax purposes, of course. Tax purposes. I took out another document. This is a record of all the improvements I made to the house with my personal money, the kitchen remodel, the landscaping, the extension for the kids' room. Total, over $25,000 of my own money. Mom, where are you going with this? Matt asked, clearly nervous. That your father not only stole 30 years of my life, but he also stole my money. And you were his accomplices. I took a photograph from the album I had rescued from the trash. Remember this picture? It's from the day Matt graduated with his engineering degree. Do you know how hard I worked to pay for that university? How many early mornings, how many pies sold at the farmer's market? The photo was passed from hand to hand. In it, Matt was hugging me while I cried with pride. Mom, Matt had tears in his eyes. And this one? I took out the photo of Emily's wedding dress. 18 months of teaching quilting classes to pay for the dress of your dreams. Because I couldn't bear to see you sad. Mom, we didn't know, Emily whispered. You didn't know because you never asked. You never cared where the money for your needs came from. You only cared that it was there when you needed it. I placed the most painful photo on the table. It was from last Christmas, the last one before Richard kicked me out. In it, I was serving dinner while the whole family laughed around the table. Do you know what I see in this picture? I see a woman who cooked for 2 days to prepare the perfect dinner for her family. A woman who got up at 5 in the morning to bake fresh bread because she knew Richard liked it that way. A woman who spent her own money on gifts for everyone while asking for nothing for herself. The silence in the suite was deafening. And now, I continued, do you know what I see? I see the same people who sat at that table, who ate that food, who received those gifts, planning how to get rid of me because I was no longer useful to them. Alice, please. Richard tried to interrupt. I'm not finished. My voice had become firm, authoritative. Richard, you told me you needed to find something better. Well, I found something better, too. I pulled the last document from the folder. These are the deeds to my new house on the North Shore. I bought it last week. 4 bedrooms, a garden, a swimming pool, and most importantly, it is entirely in my name. The North Shore? Jessica couldn't hide her shock. You bought a house on the North Shore? A $2 million house, to be exact. And this is just the beginning. All the color had drained from Richard's face. Alice, we need to talk alone. No, Richard. We don't need to talk alone about anything anymore. For 30 years, we talked alone, and every conversation ended with me giving up another piece of my dignity. I turned to my grandchildren, who had been listening in silence. Santiago, Sophia, I want you to know something very important. Grandma didn't disappear because she stopped loving you. Grandma disappeared because the adults decided she wasn't worth having around anymore. Mom, don't bring the kids into this, Emily protested. The children are already in this, Emily. You brought them into it when you decided it was better to keep them away from me. I stood up from the table with all the dignity I could muster. This is my final proposal, Richard, the divorce will proceed as planned. I don't want the house, I don't want alimony, I don't want anything from you. But you will also receive nothing of mine. Alice, let's be reasonable. Matt, Emily, you are my children and I will always love you. But I will no longer allow you to treat me as your emotional housekeeper. If you want a relationship with me, it will be one of mutual respect. What about us? Santiago asked with an innocence that could cut through any defense. I knelt to his level. You, my loves, will always have an open door at my house. But you will come because you want to be with Grandma, not because your parents send you over when they need a free babysitter. I took my handbag and walked towards the door. The bill for the suite is paid. Enjoy the tea service. It's the last thing I'll ever pay for you. When I left the hotel, I felt as if a weight of 30 years had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in my adult life, I had said exactly what I thought without worrying about hurting feelings or keeping the family peace. I was free. Completely free. 6 months after that meeting at the St. Regis, I found myself standing in the garden of my new house on the North Shore, watching the gardener plant red roses in the central flower bed. It was a perfect spring morning, with that warm April sun that embraces without burning, and for the first time in decades, I had absolutely nothing to do for anyone but myself. The house was everything I had dreamed of without daring to dream. 4 spacious bedrooms, each with its own bathroom, a modern kitchen where I could cook if I wanted to and not because I had to, and a living room with enormous windows that looked out onto the garden where the flowers I had chosen were now growing. There wasn't a single piece of furniture I hadn't personally selected, not a single color that didn't reflect my own tastes, finally free from the opinions and suggestions of others. That morning, I had a special appointment. I had decided to do something I always wanted but never allowed myself: take painting classes. "Good morning, Mrs. Miller," greeted Maria, the housekeeper who came 3 times a week. The difference was that now I was the one in charge, not the one cleaning up after others. "Good morning, Maria. Remember, my painting instructor arrives at 11. Please prepare some tea and cookies for after the class." "Of course, ma'am. Anything else?" "No, that's all." "Thank you. That's all." Such a simple and powerful phrase. For 30 years, my usual response had been, yes, I also need to do this, and that, and prepare that for. Now, when my needs were met, everyone else's could wait. At 11 o'clock sharp, my instructor Helen arrived, a woman in her 50s with paint stains on her hands and a genuine smile that reminded me why I had chosen this activity. "Alice, how are you feeling today? Ready to keep exploring with color?" Over the last 3 months, Helen had taught me basic techniques in watercolor and oil. My first attempts had been clumsy, frustrating, but gradually I had begun to find my own voice through the brush. There was something profoundly liberating in creating something beautiful that didn't have to serve any purpose other than my own satisfaction. "Very well, Helen. Today I want to try something different. I want to paint a self-portrait." "A self-portrait? That's ambitious. Are you sure?" "Completely sure." I sat before the easel with a mirror beside me, observing my reflection with an honesty I had denied myself for years. The wrinkles around my eyes no longer seemed like signs of decay, but maps of lived smiles and tears. My gray hair, which once made me feel invisible, now seemed elegant, distinguished. My hands, marked by decades of domestic work, were strong and capable. I began to paint slowly, mixing colors on the palette until I found the exact tone of my skin. Helen guided me patiently, but mostly she let me explore. "Do you know what I see in this self-portrait?" she asked after 2 hours of work. "What do you see?" "I see a woman who is finally seeing herself with love." She was right. For the first time in my life, I was painting myself not as someone's mother, not as someone's wife, but as Alice. Simply Alice. That afternoon, after class, I decided to do something I had been putting off for months: visit my old neighbor, Mrs. Davis, who had been my confidant for years when I lived in Oak Park. I found her at the local farmer's market, as I knew I would on a Thursday, buying her vegetables for the week. When she saw me, she nearly dropped her bag of tomatoes. "Alice, I can't believe it's you. You look radiant." It was true. The mirrors no longer lied to me. The constant stress had vanished from my face, my shoulders were no longer perpetually tense, and my new clothes fit well because I had finally regained my appetite and was eating properly. "Hello, Carol," I said, using her first name. "How have you been?" "I'm fine, but tell me about you. I heard you and Richard split up. And the neighbors say you moved to the North Shore. Is it true?" "It's true." "Oh, Alice. But how? Where did you get the money for a house like that?" I told her the story of my father's inheritance, of the land in Texas, of how I had been carrying that fortune without knowing it. Mrs. Davis listened, her eyes growing wider and wider. "And your children? How did they take the news?" "Very badly at first. But slowly, they're starting to understand that things have changed." It was true, though it had been a slow and painful process. After the meeting at the hotel, Matt and Emily had gone through several stages: first denial, then anger, then attempts at emotional manipulation, and finally, very gradually, something resembling respect. Matt had been the first to reach out, 3 weeks after the confrontation. He had called to apologize, but not in the superficial way he had before. This time, he specifically acknowledged the cruel things he had said and done. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about what you said at the hotel. You're right. We treated you like you were our employee, not our mother. And that was wrong. Matt, I appreciate you admitting that. Do you think we could start over? Differently this time?" "What does differently mean to you?" "It means visiting you because we want to see you, not because we need something. It means asking how you are, what you've been doing, what makes you happy. It means treating you like the person you are, not the function you served in our lives." It had been a start. Small, tentative, but real. Emily had taken longer, but she finally arrived one day with the grandchildren, unannounced, just to ask if they could spend the afternoon with me. "Mom, the kids miss you." "And I miss you too." "Do you miss me, or do you miss what I did for you?" "I miss you. I miss talking with you, I miss your advice, I miss having a mom." That day we had cooked together, but differently. Emily had insisted on helping, on washing the dishes, on cleaning the kitchen. And when they left, she had given me a real hug, not the mechanical goodbye hug she had given me for years. Carol, do you know what the strangest thing about all this is? I said as we walked among the market stalls. What's that? I finally understand the difference between being alone and being lonely. For 30 years I was lonely, surrounded by people who didn't truly see me. Now I'm alone by choice, and I feel more accompanied than I have in decades. Mrs. Davis nodded with the wisdom that only women who have lived long enough to understand the nuances of the human heart possess. And Richard? Have you heard anything about him? I heard from the kids that things with Jessica didn't work out as he expected. Apparently, she was much more interested in his money than he realized. When she found out I had more money than him, she started pressuring him to try to win me back. Seriously? Yes. But when he realized what she really wanted, he ended the relationship. Now he's alone in that big house he was so eager to keep for her. And how do you feel about that? Nothing. I feel nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity, not anger. It's like hearing a story about a stranger. And it was true. The man who had shared my bed for 30 years had become a character in a life that no longer belonged to me. That night, in my studio, because now I had a studio, I finished the self-portrait I had started that morning. I stared at it for a long time, fascinated by the woman I had captured on the canvas. It was me, but it was a me I hadn't known before. A woman with dignity in her posture, with intelligence in her eyes, with strength in her hands. A woman who wasn't asking for permission to exist. When the phone rang, it was Santiago. Grandma, can I come visit tomorrow? I want you to teach me how to paint like you. Of course, my love. But why do you want to learn to paint? Because when you're painting, you look really happy. And I want to be happy like you. After I hung up, I sat in my favorite armchair, an armchair I had chosen solely because I liked it, not because it matched anything else, and looked out the window at my moonlit garden. At 70, I had finally learned the most important lesson of all, that it is never too late to start living your own life. And that true love, the love that is worthwhile, never requires you to erase yourself to exist. 2 years later, on a golden October afternoon, I found myself sitting on the terrace of my house, packing for my first trip to Europe. At 72, I would finally visit Paris, Rome, and Barcelona, cities I had dreamed of seeing for decades but which were always pushed aside for family needs, the children's expenses, and others' priorities. Spread across the wrought iron table I'd picked out at an antique shop in Andersonville were my new passports, hotel reservations, and plane tickets. All paid for with my money, planned according to my tastes, designed exclusively for my happiness. The garden had flourished spectacularly. The rose bushes I planted when I moved in now formed a perfect arch over the stone path, and the jasmine climbing the pergola filled the air with its sweet fragrance. Every plant had been chosen by me, every corner designed according to my personal vision of what a home should be. Grandma, are you packing already? Asked Santiago, now 10 years old, as he ran in from the entrance. He had his school backpack and that smile that always filled my heart. Yes, my love. The flight leaves the day after tomorrow. And you'll send me postcards from all the museums? As many as you want. But I'll also bring you something special from each city. Santiago had become my companion in artistic adventures. Every Saturday he came to my house for our painting classes, though they were really sessions where we both explored colors and shapes while talking about life. It was he who had suggested I visit the great museums of the world. Grandma, can I ask you something? Of course, you can. Are you happy now? The question took me by surprise, not for its innocence, but for the clarity with which I could answer it. Very happy, Santiago. For the first time in many years, I am completely happy. Because you have money? No, my love. The money gave me freedom, but the happiness came when I decided that my life belonged to me. He grew thoughtful as he mixed blue and yellow on his color palette. And do you miss when we all lived together in the big house? It was a question he asked me frequently, and my answer had evolved over time. I miss some of the beautiful moments we had together. But I don't miss feeling invisible in my own family. That afternoon, while Santiago painted an imaginary landscape full of castles and friendly dragons, Emily arrived. She no longer arrived with the perpetual rush that used to characterize her, nor with the mental list of favors she needed me to do. Now she came simply to visit. Mom, how are you feeling about the trip? Are you nervous? A little. But it's an excited kind of nervous, not anxiety. You're going to have so much fun. And you deserve it. It was extraordinary to hear those words from the same daughter who, 2 years earlier, had told me I had already lived my life. She now understood that life isn't lived just once between your 20s and 50s, but that it can be constantly reinvented if one has the courage to do so. Emily, can I ask you something? Of course. When did you realize that you had all been treating me badly? She was silent for a moment, watching Santiago as he painted, absorbed in his fantasy world. It was when Santiago asked me why Grandma had gone away. When I tried to explain that sometimes adults make difficult decisions, he said, "But Mom, Grandma didn't go away. You guys kicked her out." And that's when I realized we were seeing the same situation from completely different perspectives. And what else made you think? When you started to change. When we saw you at the St. Regis, when we learned about your new house, when you started taking painting classes, we realized you had been holding back a huge part of yourself to fit into the space we had assigned you. It was a deep and painful understanding, but a necessary one. And now, how do you see me? I see you as the woman you always were, but who we never bothered to get to know. I see you as intelligent, creative, strong, independent. I see you as Alice, not just as Mom. That night, after Emily and Santiago left, I sat in my studio surrounded by the canvases I had painted over the last 2 years. There were landscapes, portraits, and abstract explosions of color representing my emotions at different moments in this process of rebirth. But there was one special painting I kept in a prominent place, the self-portrait I had painted on that first day. Next to it, I had hung a photograph of how I looked 2 years ago, the day I was kicked out of my house. The difference was astonishing. The photograph showed a stooped woman, dressed in cheap clothes, with eyes that pleaded for approval and a smile that was more of an apology than an expression of joy. In the self-portrait, I had captured an upright woman, in clothes she had chosen because she loved them, with eyes that radiated confidence and a smile that was pure self-satisfaction. The phone rang. It was Matt. "Mom, can I stop by tomorrow night? I want you to meet someone." Over these 2 years, Matt had gone through his own process of reflection. He had divorced a wife who, he admitted, treated him with the same condescending manner he had treated me. Now he was dating a woman named Patricia, who worked for a foundation for senior citizens. "Patricia wants to meet me." "Yes. I've told her a lot about you, about your transformation, about the lessons you've taught me without even realizing it." "What lessons?" "That it's never too late to stand up for yourself. That true love doesn't require you to erase yourself. That dignity is non-negotiable, no matter how old you are." The next day, I met Patricia. She was a woman in her 40s, with a vibrant intelligence and a way of speaking that reminded me of the person I might have been if I had had the confidence to express my opinions freely from a young age. "Alice, Matt has told me your story. It's incredible how you managed to transform such a painful situation into an opportunity for growth." "Patricia, I've learned something. The deepest crises are often disguised invitations to become who we were truly meant to be. Matt says you've inspired some major changes in his life." I looked at my son, this 34-year-old man who was finally learning to see women as whole people instead of functions to be fulfilled for him. "Patricia, I think Matt is finally learning the difference between loving someone and depending on someone. And that's a lesson we should all learn before we hurt the people we love most." That night, after they left, I packed my last suitcase for the trip to Europe. As I folded each piece of clothing I had chosen specially for this journey, I reflected on the path I had traveled since that terrible night when Richard had discarded me like an old piece of furniture. The woman who had cried on the floor of that damp apartment no longer existed. Not because she had died, but because she had evolved, transformed, been reborn from the ashes of a life others had built for her. Now I had a life I had designed entirely according to my own desires, values, and dreams. My last thought before falling asleep was about the irony of fate. Richard, who had traded me for a younger woman in search of a better life, now lived alone in the house he had considered so important, working more hours than ever to maintain a lifestyle he could no longer share with anyone. Jessica had abandoned him when she realized I had more money, and his children visited him with the same obligatory frequency with which they used to visit me. Meanwhile, I was about to embark on an adventure I had dreamed of for 70 years. Life, I thought as I closed my eyes, has a very peculiar sense of humor. But above all, life rewards those who finally find the courage to live on their own terms. Have you ever experienced something similar, or do you know someone who has gone through a situation like this? Tell me about it in the comments. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel so this message can reach someone who needs to hear it.